Behold, the Amiga that many consider the holy grail of Amigas, an A1200 tower with an 060 and a PowerPC processor. Yeah, I may be one of those people. It's flipping Nora, I wanted one of these in my youth. So let's find out if the reality matches the dream, as we look into the history of this machine and take it apart and give it a bit of a refurbish. These machines were built in an unfortunate time for the Amiga, as sadly Commodore had gone under, and the Amiga was about to pass through a number of hands, firstly through Gateway, the surprisingly cow-themed computer company, and then on to ESCOM, neither of which really wanted to do anything with the Amiga anyway. Despite this fact, there was still a large number of Amiga users who were still very loyal to the platform, using it as their daily machine. However, with PCs getting both faster and cheaper, and the internet starting to be used at home, Amiga users needed upgrades. Into this Commodore-less vacuum, many hardware vendors stepped in. There were all sorts of upgrades from CPU accelerators, better IDE interfaces, people also wanted to add CD-ROM drives, but fitting them in an A1200's case, yeah, that was difficult. The problem with the wedge design for the A1200 is it's very space limited. Also, it's got some nice thick plastic, so it's also thermally quite limiting as well. There's only so much heat you can put in that thing before stuff starts to go wrong. This is where the tower came in. Not only gives us a lot more space to put various upgrades in, including 5¼ inch and 3½ inch drive bays, so you can add, CD-ROM drives and even extra floppy drives and the occasional zip drive too. All this extra space also meant a lot more airflow, so, if your expansions happen to kick out more heat than the A1200's case could accommodate, well, you were fine here. Also, a bigger power supply in this thing also meant you could pull more power as well, which was, a bonus. Of course, there was not just one vendor offering tower upgrades for the A1200. No, there were a fair few. Some of them were basically just simply a case and a couple of things to marry up a keyboard connector and a couple of LEDs. Some, however, were a lot more complicated. One of the most popular was from Elbox, which is the one I have here, because not only did it provide space and power, the Elbox had the option of a Zorro 2-bus add-on. Yeah. This Zorro 2-bus add-on provided Zorro 2 slots, just like those in the Amiga 2000, so you could add regular Zorro cards. This gave your A1200 tower access to loads more Amiga hardware, like a half-decent network card, for example, rather than something just tacked into the PCMCIA slot. But more importantly, it meant you could get retargetable graphics boards and install them too. Ooh. This board also provides a couple of extra features as well. You get 3 clock ports, which is the thing you can use to connect stuff internally into the A1200. So, for example, modern USB interfaces use that. So having a few more of them than the standard Amiga, well, that was pretty nice. However, they were not done there. Oh no, by no means. This add-on also had its own add-on, in the form of a PCI mediator, so you could install PCI cards. Now, sadly, I don't have one of those, unfortunately. I mean, I'd love to be able to show it to you, but you'll have to suffice for this little photograph of it. There it goes. See, nice little photo. Yeah, I'm afraid I really don't have the money to buy this thing. Now, the nice part about the PCI mediator is those are 32-bit slots rather than the 16 bits of the Zorro slots. That's why there are these couple of extra connectors here. That provides the 32-bit bus expansion. They actually look more like something out of an Acorn ARM-based machine. Of course, you couldn't just stick in any old PCI card. Now, you had to pick one of the very limited number of which happened to have a driver for Amiga OS. However, at this point in time, those limited PCI cards, yeah, they were a lot cheaper than their Amiga equivalents. So a cheap network card or sound card, or even a graphics card, cost way less than their Zorro or Zorro 3 equivalent. Tower kits also meant increased space, which meant builders of CPU accelerator cards had space for even bigger accelerators, and importantly, more airflow, as the more powerful the accelerator, yeah, the more heat that thing generates. Now this brings me very neatly onto the PowerPC. See, it's almost like these videos are planned and scripted. I mean, almost. Different vendors have been producing 060-based accelerators for a while, which have been taking advantage of the extra space the tower case offered. This is why most trapdoor-based 060 accelerators from this period, yeah, they don't fit that well in a regular A1200 case. You usually end up with a stick of RAM stuck out the bottom or something like that, because they were intending these things to go in tower cases. Now the 060-based cards, while providing a nice speed boost over the 040 cards, did have a bit of a problem on the horizon. Motorola had announced that the 68060, yeah, that was going to be the last processor in the 68000 line. They didn't see much future in the world of CISC CPUs, well, especially for anyone who wasn't making an x86 compatible chip. So accelerator vendors had to look for a new processor to put on their cards. This is when the PowerPC puts in its first appearance on the Amiga scene. Apple had started the transition from 68,000 to PowerPC in its Macintosh line of machines. And to Phase 5, a CPU accelerator vendor known for its Blizzard and Cyberstorm range of cards, the PowerPC looked like the next logical step. There are good reasons that the PowerPC looked like the logical choice for the next generation of CPU for the Amiga. Firstly, Motorola was behind it, who'd created the 68,000. And you know, Apple had gone that way, so it's a lot easier to follow in someone else's footsteps. Interestingly, this was not Commodore's plan for the Amiga at all. Prior to bankruptcy, they'd intended to move to HP's RISC-PA processor, which is a RISC-based CPU that HP made use of in its Unix workstation range. As for compatibility with older Amigas, well, that was going to be handled by software emulation. Perhaps the most shocking part of Commodore's future plans for the Amiga was that it was going to ship with Windows NT rather than an update of the Amiga OS. Of course, Phase 5 didn't know any of this. We only know about this because we found out years later from former Commodore engineers. So, with no Commodore around, and the Amiga's current owner seeming to be entirely asleep at the wheel, Phase 5 could do basically whatever it liked. So in 1998, Phase 5 released the Blizzard PowerPC Accelerator card, available with a 603E PowerPC processor and either an 040 or an 060 68,000 base CPU. The one I have has got a 250 MHz 603 and a 50 MHz 060, which would have set you back £599 back then. Of course, now on eBay it'd go for way more than £1,000. However, when I bought mine for spares and repairs in 2001, I paid £30 for it. Yeah. It has however taken me 20 years to get it repaired. And in fact, I didn't repair it, a friend of mine did it for me who's actually quite good at doing surface mount work, and unlike me, he's even got the right tooling for it. Yep, so that's the secret to affordable, cheap retro computing, everyone. Buy the stuff when it's considered old junk and not retro yet, or invent time travel. So yeah, probably time to buy those old PS3s and PSPs now while they don't cost you an arm and a leg. You never know. One day, even those couple of Pi 1s I bought that I haven't found a good use for, yeah, they might actually be worth more than I paid for them. I mean, I can't imagine a lot more. Now, in order for this PowerPC's processor to work, Phase 5 needed to introduce a new PowerPC kernel to run alongside the normal 68,000 Amiga OS one. They called it PowerUp, and this was responsible for all the PowerPC OS operations, which meant that PowerPC and 68,000 based software could run side by side. Initially, there was not a lot of PowerPC software. One of the bits of software that did ship with the board was some PowerPC data types, which meant existing 68,000 apps could use the PowerPC to decode complicated data types like MPEG video, MP3 audio, even JPEGs. However, this came at a cost. Whenever the code would context switch between 68K and PowerPC, as both CPUs shared the same memory, each CPU would need their cache flushed. Otherwise, the two CPUs would have an inconsistent view of what was in RAM. This really impacted performance. Even for 68K based CPUs, they're very reliant on CPU cache to run at anywhere near full speed, and for the PowerPC it was devastating. It's this same cache flushing behaviour, which is why the Amiga could emulate the Mac faster than the Mac could run itself on the same CPU. As macOS used the CPU's exception handling functions to do the context switch between kernel and regular user space, it also happened to flush the cache every time an application jumped from user to kernel space. When you emulated it on Amiga, yeah, you didn't use those exception handling features, so no flushing of the CPU cache, which is why the Amiga could run Mac stuff faster than the Mac. Politically, there were also issues too. I mean, of course there was. This is post-Commodore Amiga. I mean, nobody could do anything without starting a bun fight. Anyway, Phase 5 with PowerUp had introduced ELF as its binary format for both libraries and executables. This is the format used by Unix clones and also Linux to this day. They did this as it meant they could make use of the open source GCC compiler to build code for PowerUp, which saved them having to write a whole compiler of their own. You know, which is not that easy to do, and also really hard if you want it to not suck at optimizing code. This decision, however, meant that many people thought Phase 5 were bringing too much Unixy stuff to the Amiga. They wanted it to use the hunk format for executables and libraries, the same way in which the 68,000 did. So in steps Hodge and Partners. Sorry, German viewers, I probably just butchered that. But yeah, the company that was working on the Amiga OS at the time. And they introduced WarpOS, a different kernel that did extend the hunk format so it could support PowerPC. So now we have two competing PowerPC standards for the Amiga, both of which are incompatible with each other. Let the bun fight commence! First, WarpOS claimed that it had solved, or at least greatly improved, the issue with the context switch. A claim which Phase 5 very strongly disputed. In fact, they said flat out they were wrong. As best as I can tell, Phase 5 were pretty much right. This context switch issue, yeah, it's an insurmountable problem. And while WarpOS may have reduced the number of context switches going on, yeah, it certainly didn't solve the problem. Up to version 7 of WarpOS, WarpOS had made use of PowerUp to get itself started. However, after version 7, WarpOS got renamed to WarpOS, and now, yeah, it needed PowerUp to be disabled on the card. The problem is PowerUp was flashed into the EEPROM of the accelerator card itself, so WarpOS kind of had to guess how to disable it, which of course hardware and ROM updates broke, which led to Haj and partners accusing Phase 5 of, well, breaking stuff on purpose. To start with, PowerUp had way more applications like TurboPrint PowerPC and games like Doom and Quake. However, soon both sides were in a battle to see who could get what ported to either PowerUp or WarpOS. And some of these ports, well, they were more about political point scoring than making an actual functioning application or a game. Hyperion Entertainment, they were very well known for this and produced some very dodgy ports for WarpOS. Interestingly, that was the company that would take over Amiga OS development after Amiga Inc. transferred the license to them for Amiga OS 4, and yet they didn't use the WarpOS code. On the compiler front, PowerUp could make use of the freely available GCC, while for WarpOS, you needed Harp and Partners Storm C++ compiler, which was of course closed source and you had to pay for it. So there's a bit of a conflict of interests there. Also, I am trying a variety of ways of pronouncing this company's name. Just FYI, I figured one of them's bound to be right at some point. Cue hundreds of Germans sending me a link to a proper pronunciation of it. I'll really appreciate the first person who puts that in the comments. The next several hundred of you slightly less. As the bun fight continued, this led to a split with MorphOS, a whole Amiga-like operating system using PowerUp. Did this split enforce bitter resentment? Yes, of course it did. This is the Amiga. Eventually this mess ended when Frank Weil, again I'm assuming that's how it's pronounced, produced a wrapper that allowed PowerUp code to run on WarpOS. Problem solved. And it only took a few dozen scorched newsgroups to get there. Now, in hindsight, you may be wondering, why did people spend all this money on PowerPC accelerators and these businesses spend so much time in research and development and bun fights? Well, people had a lot of passion for the Amiga and they wanted to see the platform continue and develop and, well, stay alive mostly. And this trend was also helped along by various Amiga magazines who had perhaps, as you say, a more rosy view than was realistic of the Amiga's future. Amiga format, we're looking at you. Probably worth noting that if you're a publisher of Amiga magazines, yeah, your financial well-being and the future of the Amiga platform, those are very well-aligned goals. So you're not going to produce the issue with the title cover, well screw it, this thing's dead then, innit? Well, as you've now heard a bit of a history of this thing, it's time to get it open and start refurbishing, and get the PowerPC card installed. As you can see, this is a fairly bog-standard AT tower case from the time. They've modified as few of the dies as possible they use for stamping out the metal. If you look here, you can see where the AT keyboard connector's supposed to go. However, in this case, that's not where the A1200's keyboard connector is. No, it's located here instead. You can see at the front, they even left a spectacularly useless turbo button too. The reset button does, however, work. Yeah, it connects up to a little set of pins on the Zorro 2 bus board, and gives you a reset button for your Amiga. Nice. Right, I'm going to take out the A1200's board because yeah, I know this thing needs recapping. I've been using it with just a normal accelerator card for a few years and, well, it's a little bit crashy. And also, the audio sounds pretty bad on it. So it takes a little while to drop down this little metal flap here and then we can actually extract the Amiga's board. The next bit sadly happened off camera. I was getting all set up to do a nice recapping montage for you when I noticed one of the capacitors has bulged and, well, pulled up part of the PCB. As I think I said earlier in this video, I am not a fan of doing surface mount work. I'm not brilliant at it and I don't have the ideal tooling. I can handle a bit of recapping, but much beyond that, yeah, no to the surface mount. So I packed this all up and sent it off to be recapped by someone who's actually good at this stuff and, can do PCB reworking as well. And after it had been sent off in the post and I got my little number saying that it had been delivered successfully, I thought, oh, I probably should have filmed that before I posted it. Yeah, bit late. But anyway, it's come back and it's good, and look, you can see this little bit where the audio capacitor had bulged up and ripped up the track, possibly. It's hard. I'm trying to get the camera to autofocus on it. Yeah, it's probably not that easy to see, but it's there. I've got a little error, look. Ooh. So after cleaning up the inside of this case, yeah, our Amiga board can go back inside it. Right, there's not much point in refurbishing all of this and getting capacitors replaced and whatnot if we don't replace the power supply unit in this thing. This is a very cheap Taiwanese or possibly Chinese AT power supply. These were terrible when they were manufactured, and 20 odd years, yeah, it's not going to make that terrible any better. So rather than try and repair or recap something that was basically awful to start with, yeah, I'm going to put a new power supply in here. Now, no one's really making AT power supplies anymore as the PC's moved on to the ATX standard now. But what you can get is adapter cables that goes from the ATX standard to the AT standard. There are two versions of this, one that provides a sort of negative rail and one that doesn't. As the Amiga 1200 doesn't use this negative rail, yeah, we're just using a little converter cable that doesn't because it's cheaper. So I've got this nice modern modular Corsair power supply to go in there. It's a bit beefy. This should make sure that all our voltage rails are nice and can pull a decent number of amps without things going all wrong. Right, it's now time to get the PowerPC card in. Now, as you can see, even in the tower case, it's a little bit of an awkward fix. We sort of got to just get it in at the right angle so it doesn't bash into anything. But eventually it gets finagled into place. This would be quite a tricky fit in a regular A1200 case, because although you can't see the back of this thing, there's a big stick of RAM poking out of it, which would really mess with fitting it in under the keyboard. Also, yeah, you need a bit more ventilation around those CPUs as well. Right, so we power this thing on to see if we can get it to boot, and it doesn't. Yeah, if we pop into the diagnosis screen, yeah, we can see why. I apologise for the shaky camera work. I'm trying to hold the camera and use the machine at the same time. Yeah, but we can see it only picks up two boards, CPU accelerator and our network card. Yeah, it's not picked up the IDE interface. Yeah, so that's why it doesn't boot. It doesn't think it's got any hard disks. So it turns out this little bit of the IDE controller had come loose that fits over one of the chips on the Amiga's board. So with that firmly pressed back in place, I thought I'd fixed it. I mean, it detected the drive alright and it booted. Yeah, but then they continued to be unstable and weird and just very difficult to pin the fault down for, and had me making weird sounds like this. Oh, yeah, apparently based on some of the recordings, I made that sound a lot. So eventually I removed that IDE controller and put in a spare Zorro 2 one I had from my Amiga 2000, and guess what? Yeah, everything worked. Everything worked just fine. Well, there's a couple of evenings of my life I'm not going to get back. So with a working machine, I was able to install OS 3.9 and the WarpOS updates, as well as a few other fixes, and of course the PowerUp emulator that we talked about earlier. And then I've got myself a nice base for doing some PowerPC stuff. Or at least I thought I was ready to, until something else went wrong. Yeah, turns out the device I used to do the scan rate conversion from the Amiga so I can capture it with my little HDMI capture card with the footage you see here, yeah, that broke. Not in an obvious it doesn't power up sort of way, no, in a just not producing an output sort of way, which made me think that the Amiga had problems, which meant I went back to trying to figure out what was wrong with its hardware. And yeah, it was the little converter device. So, one new converter later, I'm ready to start capturing some stuff again to show you what this thing can do, right? Yeah, if you're wondering why there was no video in November and the November videos turned up in December, yeah, this is why. This is exactly the reason why. Right, let's try running Doom on this thing, because as I said before, all retro videos must show Doom running on a bit of hardware. Now, we're running this on the 68060 because, as we all know, yeah, Doom runs perfectly smoothly on that. Unless, of course, you're a journalist for Game Rants, at which point this is shocking news for you. But yeah, this is just to show you that the card does a pretty good job of being a 68060. So from that point of view, yeah, it's a pretty good accelerator. Now, the next PowerPC thing I'm going to install to make this operating system much more usable is the PowerPC data types. In Amiga OS, data types let you decode various image and sound formats. And at the time of the PowerPC accelerators, one of its big features was these accelerate data types. See, at this point in time, the internet was becoming big, and image formats like JPEG and GIF, yeah, they were starting to become, well, important. And if you had a basic 68000, yeah, decoding a JPEG was fairly CPU intensive. I know it must seem like a bit of a nothing-burg task now, but in the mid-90s, yeah, if you were an early 90s machine, this was a pretty big deal. I mean, JPEG images, for example, had built-in compression, and you had things like MP3 audio turning up, and man, did that need a lot of CPU power. You can see me installing the JPEG type here now. And one of the cool things you can see, as it installs, you can see I browse the web browser there, suddenly turn the text-only buttons, into image-based ones, because it stored them as JPEGs. And suddenly, it knows how to deal with JPEG images. Speaking of iBrowse, as you can see here, once we got the PowerPC stuff installed, so it's handling the data types, the 68,000 base web browser is surprisingly alright for this period of time. Yeah, admittedly, it's running on the 68060, which is Pentium equivalent, and that's what the PCs were using. But for a platform that was just sort of coming to the end of its production life when the web was starting to rise, this is doing surprisingly alright. Of course, this is about as good as web browsing would be on this platform for quite a long time. It's only in recent years that we've seen people having a crack at writing a 68,000 base browser again with NetSurf. And admittedly, that team initially, they were just aiming at RISC-OS that was running on things like Raspberry Pis. But the backports of this have worked surprisingly well. So I bet you're dying to see this thing play some games that really need the PowerPC. So I'm going to show you Quake. Originally I was going to show you Quake 2, but I'll show you this little bit of the installer. Apparently I have negative free space on my hard drive. This is what happens when you use far too small an int to represent free space and it wraps back round. So I got Quake working. Now, a 68060 can just about run Quake. It does it well enough that you can play it. But with PowerPC, it's smooth. It's really quite smooth. This did not run that well on my PC of this era. It's got a frame rate. Now, actually, this probably could look a little bit nicer than it does. And the reason it doesn't look as nice as possible is because I don't have a retargetable graphics card in this machine. So this is the AGA chipset running in 8-bit. So we got a fairly low resolution and only 256 colours to play with. We are also putting the CPU to a bit more work than perhaps it ought to, because of the whole sort of planar to chunky conversion going on here. So the AGA chipset only supports planar graphics, which is awkward from a 3D game perspective. What you really want to do is just be able to write a colour value into memory, and that's 1 pixel. But that's not what's going on here. What you actually have is, 8 memory locations to write to update 1 pixel. So you have to do all your pixel writing, essentially. So you write 8 pixels into one plane, then into the next, then into the next, then into the next, then next, until it's done, which is not the way you calculate this stuff out when you're actually doing the maths behind it. Now, I did have an RTG card I tried to get working in here. It's one I usually have in my Amiga 3000, and it supports both Zorro 2 and Zorro 3 with a little jumper. So I set it to Zorro 2, put it in the busboard, and I could not get that thing working at all. It's actually a modern card, a VA2000. And eventually I found a post from the creator of the thing saying that it doesn't actually work with this busboard and he doesn't know why, and as he hasn't got one, he can't really sort it out, which is, fair enough. Also, he's moved on to developing other hardware now. So I had to give that one up and just run this game in AGA mode so you can see it. That neatly brings me on to a wider point with RTG and, running PowerPC. A lot of PowerPC software, especially games, expects that you have an RTG card. At this point in time, the Amiga's chipset, it really is quite far behind where the PC is, with only 8 bits being your maximum true colour depth, excluding ham, and fairly low resolutions without flicker. Most people with the kind of money to buy a PowerPC board had already bought themselves an RTG board as well. And the sort of modern day-to-day stuff that PowerPC users wanted to do at this point in time, it really did need higher resolutions and colour depths. So not having one means I can't really show you the full range of software that this thing can run. Hopefully at some point I will manage to get myself a board and then we can sort of come back, because it'd be really nice to show you Wipeout for the Amiga, for example. So you may have watched this whole video and thought to yourself, so how do I try this PowerPC Amiga malarking? Well, there's more than one answer to that one. If you want to try it exactly as I've got it set up here, you're gonna struggle. PowerPC cards now for the original Amigas, they are rare. They never sold in big numbers anyway, but now they are super rare. One came up on eBay earlier this week, so I was having a bit of a look for prices, and it was listed for just short of 3,000 quid, which is mind-bogglingly expensive. Now, I don't know if they actually managed to sell the card at that price, but I have seen them sell for $2,000. Then, you need the Amiga, you need the tower case for it to go in. And, you also need an RTG card realistically, which I've not got. So, if you want to try it in this format, it is really expensive. Now, on the slightly less crazily expensive end of things, you can actually buy a machine that's built as a PowerPC Amiga from the ground up. I mean, that's how it's created. It means you can't run 68K software unless you do it under emulation, and that runs Amiga OS 4, which we weren't running here. This is all Amiga OS 3, and, you know, I'm still, well, prioritizing 68K because that's the era of Amiga I'm probably the most fond of. But you can do it, and that comes in for a bit over 1,000, which is still crazy money for what it is. But if you want to try and use Amiga OS as your daily driver, yeah, I mean, you probably sort of can. You know, if there are any Amiga OS 4 users out there who would like to make reference in the comment section, please do. Now, the realistic option for most of us is emulation. Fortunately, in the last year or two, UAE has added PowerPC support. This means you could actually get the setup I've got running here running in UAE. So you can be running Amiga OS 3 with a 68K based processor and additional PowerPC support for the, you know, faster higher end stuff. And that way we can all enjoy the experience of PowerPC Amiga stuff. Yeah, and it's not just for those with incredible amounts of money or who bought the card a stupidly long time ago. So it's basically old or wealthy. They're your two choices. I am old. So if you made it all the way to the end, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this brief look at what was an interesting window in the lifetime of the Amiga. If you liked this video, why not share it with your friends and click that little thumbs up button. If you disliked it, you can click the dislike button and no one will know apart from me. And you know, as ever, if you would like to subscribe to the channel, please do, because it really does make a big difference on whether people actually get to see these videos or not.